Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Pokemon Go, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your order using that code Omnipoke. For today's video, we're going to be looking at Palkia Inteleon for the World Championships in 2022. This deck got second place at the NAIC and has been performing very well in online tournaments. So let's jump into the general strategy of the deck. And it is all based around the Origin Form Palkia V-Star, a 280 hit point 2 prizer, which is very impressive. It has the Subspace Swell attack. For 2 water energy, you can deal 60 damage plus 20 more damage for each benched Pokemon. That's yours and your opponent's combined. And this can really rack up quite quickly if your opponent is choosing to go wide on their own side of the field, or can be disruptive and stop the opponent from putting Pokemon that they otherwise would want to put into play in fear of getting pushed into range of a Subspace Swell KO. So one that your opponent is constantly having to play around. Trying to power up this Palkia is pretty easy thanks to this Star Portal V-Star power we have here, which is a once per game effect, allowing us to attach up to 3 water energy cards from our discard pile to our water Pokemon in any way that we like. It also allows us to threaten Radiant Greninja as a backup attacking Pokemon in the deck naturally. It's got great synergy in the deck already because we have great access to water energy via Capacious Bucket and Irida to try and find that even, so that we can use the Concealed Cards ability to help us get some additional card draw in those opening stages. It then synergizes perfectly with the Melanie supporter, allowing us to potentially power up a Palkia all in one turn, or we can use that Star Portal V-Star power to do a similar deal here, or power up the Radiant Greninja, which offers up a Moonlight Shuriken attack, discarding 2 energy from itself, but allowing us to deal 90 to 2 of our opponent's Pokemon. This can be a great way to target down opponents' engine Pokemon, like Sobble and Bidoof, to really deny their draw power whilst taking prize cards, or can also be used to put things in range. If your opponent is trying to play around that Subspace Swell, you can get some nice preliminary damage on there as well. So Radiant Greninja is a perfect partner here, and Palkia takes full advantage of that card. We're also going to be using the Inteleon engine, once again, just one of the most powerful ones we have in the game right now, being able to Shady Deal for specific combo pieces the entire game, whilst also allowing us to attack with it to have another option against Miltank, not just the Radiant Greninja. Also, this Aqua Bullet dealing just 20 to the bench may seem insignificant, but it can once again help us get in range of some attackers with Subspace Swell. So a very relevant 120 to the active and 20 to a bench really does set up some combos here and there. At the same time, we're going to be using the supporter Irida. This allows us to really go wide on the board and gives us access to almost our entire deck because everything is water, essentially, as well as getting additional item cards. Irida basically reads like a double Shady Dealing in most instances because you're going to be getting Drizzile pieces and Inteleons, so you really have a ridiculous amount of tutor in the deck throughout the entire game. Onto the matchup spread then, and we'll start at the top with the very favourables. It seems as though it's got the beating of the sort of tempo variant of Palkia. It's very difficult for the tempo build to not go wide on the board, oftentimes using things like Crobat to get its initial draw going, and has to use a lot of Mew. And seeing as though many Palkia Inteleons are choosing to play Cross-Switcher, you're really not affected by Diancie that was seen in early iterations of that build. You also seem to be very strong into Urshifu Inteleon. This is because your Radiant Greninja just comes out on the field that much faster than an Urshifu in most instances, so you're able to do great spreading attacks earlier than them, and that can be a real issue. At the same time, you can force them to go wide. It's a combo-orientated deck that really doesn't do much without plenty of Shady Deals and oftentimes Octillery at the same time, so your damage output is very strong. Also, you're seemingly pretty good into Zoroark toolbox decks. Again, I think it's just the early tempo presence of a Radiant Greninja. There's nothing scarier for one-prize decks than Palkia going first against you and starting to use Radiant Greninja to put some water energy in the discard pile, because you know that you can start getting picked off very quickly by that Moonlight Shuriken attack. Also in the favourables, we have some of these other one-prize decks. Regigigas is a little bit scary here and there with their Regielekis hitting weakness on you, but they normally require additional damage modifiers to actually push one-hit KOs. And Palkia can use a variety of one-prize attacking threats here and there. It can use Manaphy, and it can use the likes of Tool Jammer to still stay out of range of a Regieleki, so is usually still going to be okay in that instance. Surprisingly enough, also decent into the Ice Rider. Again, I think Tool Jammer is a key tech card that you can play in the deck to improve this matchup. But again, it's just consistency of being more straightforward than an Ice Rider deck in general, where you're going to come out on top. Also, when your opponent starts putting 3 prizes in the mix, it really helps the prize map of a Palkia player, especially because you can look to Echoing Horn lower hit point 2 prizes. You can very easily go for a 3-2-1 game plan. And once again, Radiant Greninja is very good at helping you do that, because you can easily dish out 90 damage onto a 1-prize Pokemon, scoring a knockout, and setting up an Ice Rider for a future KO with a Palkia. The Turbo Dialga deck is similar to the Turbo Palkia, really, where they can't help but go wide, which really does improve your damage output, and you're cross-switching around Diancie, even if it is seeing play. Lunarok seems to be a reasonable one for you as well. Again, the Greninja is a great attacking presence many a time, as is the Inteleon, which has a really annoying 160 hit points, which is pretty difficult, actually, for the Lunarok player to dish out turn after turn, having to spam things like Scoop Up Net to continually get Lunatones ready to have enough energy on them just to dish out that 160. So the Inteleon pieces are some of the stars of the show here, as well as having early Palkia soaking up hits. It looks as though Mew Genesect is mildly positive as well, which is a good thing to see for Palkia. Again, it's a deck that can't help but go wide if it wants to draw any cards at all, so you're going to be in good stead in terms of your damage output, and you oftentimes can be packing Path to the Peak as well, that can be combined with Marnie or Roxanne if you choose to play those cards. There's also a Malamar matchup, which again seems okay. Once again, just the early presence of a Radiant Greninja is an issue. I've said this a lot right now, that the spread is like a worry, and yes, many of these archetypes will be choosing to play Manaphy anyway, but you really just force them to have excellent turn 1 hands, and if they don't, they're just going to crumble completely against you. And some of these decks naturally are a little bit inconsistent, so you can really pressurize them. At the same time, you oftentimes play Aqua Bullet and Zigzagoon, and sometimes even Quick Shooting, allowing you to take multiple prize knockouts, not just the Malamar, but also the Inkay on the bench, and it can force them into a really weird board state. Some even matchups, Blissey Miltank can be a bit of an awkward one, because they naturally keep such a low bench size, and that Blissey has a ton of healing cards as well built into the list, so that's not necessarily the easiest. Arc Intel as well can be a difficult deck to reach into, because they get so high in their hit points to 310, and they can sometimes function just off their Starbirth and 1 or 2 shady dealings throughout the entire game. You do really cripple their engine for the most part, but they still can get some free turns via Sharon's Care against you. Arc Gyarados also can be a tricky one, because they are packing the Memory Capsule Jolteon combo, shutting down all of your deck's abilities, which is very scary for a deck trying to tutor throughout the entire game. If you want to have a better time against this, you can tech the Tool Scrapper, but at the same time, if you go first against this deck, they're probably not going to be running Manaphy, seeing as though a Jolteon would shut it off regardless, so you can just try and snipe the EVs, so it's not always going to be a presence against you, so still one that you can easily recover from. The Inteleon toolbox also seems to be pretty even. The Charizard does very decent damage output into you, and is certainly a scary factor here. Try and use your 1 prizes as effectively as possible, and have Roxanne and sort of cross your fingers in those instances. The Mewtwo Miltank deck also is seemingly even. I'd probably, for my personal preference, drop it down into the unfavorable category, because it's not one that I necessarily want to face too much. The stats, however, are telling me that it's relatively even. You obviously do have Miltank answers built in, and you can push over 200 damage output here and there, but the amount of text we've seen from the Mewtwo players is one that I'm a little bit more concerned about than what's showing on the graph here. Also unfavourable seems to be the Duraludon Arceus. Just a mildly unfavourable one, obviously one that you can get through, but the Duraludon does pack a ton of healing, similar to the Blissey really. It's a very similar concept here. The Duraludon is more capped at its damage output than the Blissey, that can potentially get out of control, but it's still a lot of meat to get through in these instances, and they're playing very limited bench. Arc Peak is one of your lowest win rate decks, and it's mostly because of that awkward type coverage that the Pikachu can represent, and has the backbone of consistency of Arc and Bibarel, which takes up a lot less bench space than having to rely on an Inteleon engine, and they naturally have just a regular support account, etc. So they're going to continue drawing throughout the game, which is something that the Arc Intel does a lot less effectively. So they have 1-hit KO potential, and they draw much better in that matchup, because they are able to function on such a low bench size. Stone Journer also seems to be an awkward one for Palkia, because again, it's the same old story where they keep a low bench size, they play a bunch of annoying healing cards, they have that Stone Gift to undo a ton of your damage, and they slowly either choose to deck you out or they will start attacking into you on free turns whenever they have that opportunity. So another one to be on the lookout for. It's obviously not going to be the most popular deck at Worlds, but one worth mentioning because it has been seeing play in some online events and at the NAIC. Onto a skeleton list then, just 50 cards here, pretty well stripped back, but I do believe most of these cards should be in every single player's list of Palkia, with the Inteleon as the backup plan. We've seen oftentimes 3-3-1 being the line of choice here. Some players will choose to go higher on ball search counts rather than increasing their counts in the Palkia and Sobble directions, so something to bear in mind there. Manaphy is always going to be played in the list because unlike things like Arc Intel, when it's more of a debate around the Manaphy, the Palkia player basically has to go wide, even in the mirror match, which means you need to protect against your opponent's Radiant Greninja no matter what the entire game. So Manaphy is more or less a staple, I would say, here. Also, you just have much more searchability for it, thanks to Irida, so you can develop it much more easily than some other decks, where the Irida gets you Manaphy plus, like, VIP pass, and then you still get your setup going, even while searching for a Manaphy in the turn. Outside of that, pretty straightforward with a lot of ball search cards. The Hisuian Heavy seems to be a worthy include here, just because Radiant Greninja is a big part of why you get going in the game. The concealed cards oftentimes is used alongside Scoop Up Net in the opening stages, so that you can just get excellent card advantage and hit more of your combo pieces, looking to find your basics more often than not. So that's always a great thing to look out for. Echoing Horn is becoming more and more of a staple, I think. It's not just 20 additional damage for the Subspace Swell attack, but it can also bring back 2 prize Pokemon from your opponent's discard pile for you to then gust up with Cross Witches or Boss to mop up quite nicely for easy prize exchanges, even when your opponent's trying to limit their options. You have Roxanne for some comeback potential, and you have Palpad to try and reuse the likes of Melanie and Boss's orders, so the 1 counts can be mitigated nicely by the include of the Palpad, and it saves you some space here and there. Very often we see Palpad in the Inteleon engines because you can very easily deal for the cards that you just Palpaded back in and get instant access once again. So a pretty straightforward shell, I would say, overall here. Onto some other options to fill out those 10 spaces. Let's start with the bottom right, actually, and look at the damage modifiers. This is a big decision you have to make within your list, how you want to be changing things up and messing around with your math, because typically your opponent is going to try and sit a little bit out of range of 1-hit KO of Subspace Swell if they're playing well against you, and if they're able to limit their bench. So sometimes, or very often, you'll see Palkia players choosing to have a good number of these damage modifiers, so you still find a way to reach a KO. The quick shooting doesn't come online in the quickest amount of time, but it can be something that sits on your board and gets you a lot of value. Also gives you some extra spread pressure in one-prize matchups. Zigzagoon is probably the most immediate, aggressive card that you can play in the list, and it really does help you reach that 220 on turn 2, even on gusting situations, because the Galarian Zigzagoon plus the Choice Belt turn you back into an even number and can really help the Subspace Swell get big KOs. It obviously falls off in the sort of mid-game, though. And the Leon is another big push of damage all in one go, and it can be nice in combination with Choice Belt at the same time to really push into some higher hit point thresholds against the likes of Mew and Big Charmed Arceus. So having a combination of some of these is definitely going to be important in your deck, and there's merits to all of them that I just outlined there, but you don't really have space for all 3 in many instances. There's a couple other 2-prize Pokemon we've sometimes seen in Palkia lists. The Crobat giving you extra draw in those opening stages, so you're not entirely reliant on that Radiant Greninja. This can give you some bailout options here and there. This can be especially useful if you are playing VIP Pass in your list, because you're going to try and hit those and really go wide on the board as quickly as possible and have a lot of potential to pop off. Or if you're the player going second, you can try and develop double Palkia, so you're not afraid of your opponent just gusting and KOing just your lone attacker that you've developed. Luminion V, very similarly, does give you great access to Irida, which is oftentimes the lifeblood of the deck. The downside to Luminion, of course, is that it can't be used going first, unlike the Crobat, so it has a little bit less explosiveness, but can just guarantee some pretty nice turns for you just off of quick balls. The Starmie as well, more of a tech include, I would say, for some matchups. That Energy Spiral attack can really punish decks that like to have a lot of energy in play. It can force Arc Inteleon players to play very differently against you. Very good against Blissey if that's going to pop up. And you also have a Swift attack that can do a little bit of chip damage early into Miltanks, which doesn't seem the best, but it comes online faster than Inteleon in many instances. There's also the option to play more Inteleon and have Capture Energy and Rare Candy in your 60. Capture Energy is nice, of course, just giving you additional outs to make sure that you can get extra basics into play, and just having more total energy in your deck is always helpful for your Radiant Greninja at the same time, so you're never too dissatisfied seeing Capture Energy compared to something like a Quick Ball in the later stages of the game, because you can always pitch it for a couple additional cards here and there. The Rare Candy allows you to attack with Aqua Bullet early on, and that's never a bad thing to go for on turn 2. Try and skew that prize race from the off, and use that Aqua Bullet to set the active Pokemon up for KOs, whilst also allowing you to put pressure on the bench a little bit here and there with a 20 damage. This is also very annoying for Arc Intel players, where you're forcing them to Sharon's Care thanks to the 120 damage, but they can't boss's orders up and put damage onto your Palkias. They're going to have to settle for the 1 prize if they are going to heal up here and there. So that's obviously a nice thing to go for. It also means that you don't have to even put a Palkia down on your first turn. You can be content to keep calling, knowing that you could use like a Raihan and get an Inteleon out of nowhere the following turn. So another option for you here, releasing the pressure of having to get double Palkia developed in going second situations. A couple interesting supporter cards that don't always make their way into the list but are pretty strong. Marnie is a great disruptive tool, not just against like Inteleon engines, but also can be very good against Snorlax, for example, that has been seeing play in Mewtwo variants. So even just having one Marnie and Palpad gives you sort of panic early game aggressive options against them and forces them to draw at least somewhat well and develop multiple lacks. And it can be nice at disrupting opponents at any time in the game. Also combines very nicely with Path to the Peak, that wasn't actually in my Skeleton 60, but is very close to a core card in the list because it is so strong against Mew, of course. The main reason it's not in my Skeleton 60 is that it has the minor anti-synergy with your own Radiant Greninja, which is a big part of your draw engine, and of course the Palkia wants to use its V-Star power once in the game. So Path and Marnie are a bit of a package deal, I think, and if you choose to play one, it strengthens the other significantly, so it's definitely something worth considering there. Tool Jammer and Scrapper actually have their merits. I'm leaning towards the Jammer camp, despite Scrapper being in the second place list. I think Tool Jammer is slightly more cute against Ice Rider in particular, and also if anyone's going to be picking up Radiant Charizard variants, you have a little bit of extra coverage there as well. So I'm leaning on the Tool Jammer here. The Scrapper is better combined all in one turn with the likes of Belt, so it's a bit more aggressive to play the Scrapper, and it's also slightly stronger if you're worried about Jolteon Memory Capsule, but the Jammer, I think, is going to be better against the field, in my opinion. And Cheryl's another option here, gives you some extra healing now and then. It obviously leans nicely into your V-Star power, where you can tank a hit with the Palkia, Cheryl, and then V-Star, get all those energies back into play all in one go. It's niche, but it definitely can turn the tide of things when your opponent's not necessarily expecting heal. I don't think Cheryl is the most popular include in the deck, but it definitely can put an opponent's plan, sort of down the drain. So definitely one that I would consider as well. Onto the Bull Search debate as well. This is oftentimes going to be a way that we fill out our curve, trying to have more search in the list from the Skeleton 60. And I think really the big debate comes down to, do I want to max out my VIP passes and play 4 of these and 4 Irida and really try and pop off? The main reason why you want to get VIP passes, of course, is as soon as you get that Radiant Greninja rolling, you start drawing a ton of cards with your concealed cards, and it's so important to get those water energy in the discard pile early, so you are then threatening the Palkia V-Star power as quickly as possible, as well as Melanie, of course. So really everything starts when you start getting that Greninja developed, and I think the VIP pass enables that so nicely because it allows you to VIP plus Sobble or VIP plus Palkia, and allows you to really have a very strong turn 1. So the VIP really does allow you to have pop-off moments here, especially important because we want to go wide, of course. So definitely one worth considering, and has high payoffs if you are able to hit VIP in the opening stages. The Bull Search obviously falls off a lot less than the VIP pass, so sometimes just increasing these counts are going to be safer throughout the entire game. It's really down to your temperament. If you think you want to have the high rolls of having the VIP pass games, and then the low rolls of whiffing it turn 1 and having some dead cards in your deck against Marnie and against Roxanne in the later stages. Or if you want to go for less explosive potential with the ball search cards, just getting one target at a time here, but having them more live throughout the mid-game. So let's have a look at a VIP 60, and this is very close to the second place list that we saw at the NEIC, where we are playing 4 Irida, 4 VIP, and really just making that statement that even hitting 1 VIP is just monstrous, because you get rolling so nicely with that Radiant Greninja, you get to see additional cards, you get those waters flowing in the discard pile. All great stuff here. The only real changes I made from the second place list was I added in a Leon for extra burst potential here. I think I like it alongside the Zigzagoon. My debate would be you can cut Leon and Zig, and then you can just play quick shooting, or you kind of play these as a package deal. I love the immediate damage that Zigzagoon provides, so it's something that I'm a big fan of, and I do like the burst potential of having like Leon Choice Belt in the list. And because I cut the Scrapper for Jammer, I also want to have that extra push potential into the Arceus matchup. So a couple minor tweaks here and there, but overall very similar to the 60 that we saw. Also adding in Raihan here, so you can Aqua Bullet more aggressively in a lot of matchups, which I do value quite nicely. And it also gives you some prize coverage if you were to prize the Melanie. It doesn't force you into a corner against, or like having to force a star portal, which is also pretty nice. One thing I'm not playing in this list is Path of the Peak or Marnie, so these are things you could definitely consider. If you respect the Mew matchup potentially more than I do, you can add in that Path of the Peak, because on the spreadsheet that we saw in the sort of matchups, Mew was mildly favourable, and I think the majority of the time it's because you have the option to path them at any point in the game. Onto a slightly tweaked 60 then. We've simply cut down the VIP passes to just play 1 copy, because it's still fantastic to hit off Irida as player going second, or if you happen to high roll it going first, that's fine too. But it means that you just have less of these floating around your deck throughout the entire game. In its place, we've gone for 4th copy of Sobble, 4th Palkia, 4th Quick Ball. I think that's all it is. So really not too dissimilar here. Almost everything else in the list is the same. But this is for those who aren't so much of a fan of the VIP. I think you basically always play at least 1 copy as the floor here, because it has such great synergy with the Irida. But you can choose to go more sort of straightforward with just maximizing your other counts here in the deck. And finally, we have a Rare Candy 60, which I am getting more and more fond of, because I simply just love attacking with Inteleon for the most part. You also go up to 2 Shitty Dealings and have Quick Shooting here, and have as thick of a line of the Inteleon really as you'd like. You have an Ornery Rod in here as well, giving you some energy recovery, as well as Pokemon recovery, of course. Once your first Shitty Dealing has gone down, you probably want to rod this back into the deck, so you have extra access to deals throughout the entire game. Just 1 candy is typically enough, because you can try and Irida for the combo if you want turn 2 attacking pressure. And we are playing that sneaky 1 Capture Energy that gives you concealed card synergy, as well as being great in those opening stages for either developing multiple Palkia, similar to a VIP pass, or allowing you to keep calling that little bit better. And obviously you have a colorless attack cost in Aqua Bullet, so you can at least make that work for you. Outside of that, pretty much the supporters are more or less the same, so just again a few tweaks here, and obviously just having the 1 VIP pass in this 60. So my closing thoughts then, once again, if you are choosing to play Palkia Inteleon, you really have good conscience that this is a powerful deck. It's pretty much the best performer right now in online events, despite it being one of the most popular decks. Obviously that means more people have the chance to do well with it, but also everyone knows that Palkia is good, and most people are gearing their decks towards beating it and are still failing to beat it because it's just too good right now. So you at least have good knowledge that you can even just copy paste the second place NAIC list, and I'm sure you do pretty well at Worlds, to be honest. I think it's just well established at this point that Palkia Inteleon is just a very strong core. At the same time, I love that it forces players to play very differently from their ideal setup. Some players just don't know how to manage their bench against Palkia. They can find it very difficult. Some archetypes naturally find it difficult, so even if the opponent is trying to not do stuff, they are still basically forced to for their own strategy to work. So Palkia is actually one of the most disruptive decks in the format, where turn 2 you're representing sniping pressure or big one-hit KO potential if they go wide on the board. So really does force the opponent to play very weirdly, and that actually really improves the power of your Roxanne into the later stages as well. So you can play aggressively with the deck, and it makes the opponent play worse, essentially, the entire game, which is a really good feeling. One thing I will say about Palkia Inteleon is that it is a very complex deck, and some turns require a lot of Irida, shady dealing, net, shady dealing for like 5-6 piece combos here and there to get everything going on key turns. So if you're not adept at playing Palkia, I would stay away from it. It's not a deck that you can pick up, you know, a week before and hope that you've had enough testing in. If you want to do well with Palkia, you've got to start now, basically, and get like 300-400 games in with the deck, because you don't want to be missing things here and there and not getting the full value of this deck, because there's a lot of intricacies that can come into it. You got to be bringing your A game if you want to play Palkia for Worlds. And the final point here that I touched on a little bit already is that people know about Palkia Inteleon. We expect it to be probably among the most popular decks going into Worlds, and it's going to be a top performer, I would imagine. But that's not to say that people won't bring tech cards against Palkia, and certainly people going into Worlds will have come up against it and know their game plan going in. So certainly one that we're all expecting, and it's something that you have to be very confident with your own list and how well you can play Palkia Inteleon to make that the difference and still overcome the competition. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts on Palkia Inteleon. Where do you sit on the VIP versus Bull Search? Do you like the Rare Candy Inteleon combo? How else have you been trying to play Palkia? I'll hear it all down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.